Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and today we're going to hear a few stories from Dustin Deslauriers with TheRuggedArts. Now, Dustin is a lifelong hunter who actually recently discovered a passion for archery. And not only that, but Dustin is also about to be a published author. He has a book that releases this week that is actually a collection of just his best hunting stories. I've actually put a link in the show notes, so please make sure that you go check that out. But of course, if I have a guy releasing a book on hunting stories, we're going to have him on the podcast. So either way, he stays away from the stories in his book today, but he tells us some other very relatable stories. So relatable, in fact, that every time he told one, I had to tell him one of my own. I want to thank Dustin again for coming on, and I hope you all enjoy our stories as much as I enjoyed talking with Dustin. Now let's let Dustin tell you his stories. All right, Dustin, welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, buddy. I'm super excited to have you on. I know that you have a book coming up soon. I'm not sure if this episode will come out, when you release that, or maybe a few weeks after. But we've had a couple authors on, but no one that's about to have a book out. So I'm pretty excited. And you've sent me a manuscript. It looks to me, I haven't had a chance to go through all of it yet because I've been in the woods or actually in the desert chasing antelope.
Sure.
But it looks to me like it's perfectly in line with what we do here, which is tell stories. So let's kick this thing off, man, with you telling a little bit about yourself so that the people that are listening can know who they're talking with.
Yeah, my name is Dustin Deslauriers. I'm from Washington State, born and raised. I've been hunting since I was about 5 years old with my dad. And, the progression that most people go through over the span of their life, all those little stories that almost all life hunters have. I just kind of like took those and put them in a book. Not all of them, but quite a few of them. I was in the military. I currently work at Boeing, and I used to be a firearms instructor, and that's basically like the gist of who I am. I am a husband, and I do have 3 kids and a farm. So I can't not mention them. They are, the center of my life. So
absolutely. I know how that is, man. I know how that is. So what type of hunting do you do mostly now? Are you a bow hunter, rifle hunter?
So I'm predominantly a bow hunter now. I started out as a rifle hunter. I think that's probably the easiest way to get people into it. Just because actually stalking in on an animal and getting within that bow range takes some practice, to really develop a good ability to do that.
Absolutely. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I actually started my hunting in Washington with a muzzleloader. Yeah.
You got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I told the story in a previous podcast, but I've killed half an elk. But it got me hooked. And so I wasn't much of a hunter. I'm not a lifelong hunter like you are. I've only been doing it for a couple of years. But the woods of Washington, even though they're not necessarily known for their elk hunting, got me absolutely hooked on elk hunting.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of depends on who you're talking to as far as elk hunting is concerned, or rather what kind of elk hunting experience you're looking for, because it is more of a jungle on one side of the mountains here than the other. And depending on what kind of experience you're after, Utah might be better, or Nevada, or, Montana, there's plenty of other places that you can hunt elk that have a far different experience. So
yeah, absolutely. Cool, man. Well, I know I told you earlier, I don't want to ruin any of the stories in your book because they're obviously probably the best ones that you got, but I know that you've been doing this your whole life. So why don't you set the stage for us on your first story that you want to tell us today?
Yeah, so I'd like to just kind of give the viewers kind of a teaser, if you will. I'm just going to talk about the story of becoming a bow hunter for me.
Perfect.
And it's pretty simple. I was a rifle hunter growing up. I got my first rifle when I was 14 from my parents. Went out and shot a whitetail. It was probably like a 60-yard shot in a little cornfield that was mowed over and whatnot, and we were just kind of waiting for the day to break so we could take a shot. And as the years went on and I transitioned from a youth hunter to an adult hunter, it became more apparent that, there's not as many GMUs that are very receptive to a weekend hunter who's, just trying to fill the fridge. If you're hunting with a rifle in Washington, you have to go after bucks mostly. I mean, there's like literally a handful of GMUs that allow doe hunting, and they're all on islands for the most part, and you got to know a guy.
Yeah.
So I think it was the last time I went hunting with my dad and a buddy of mine. I was on a trail and I saw a doe like 10 feet away from me on my left shoulder. And I was like, oh, snap. I was just trying to take a leak. Right. And it was in that moment I couldn't harvest her because I wasn't there to shoot does,
Yeah.
So I had to shoot a buck. So it was just like you have that goal right there in front of you of meat and you can't harvest it. And I was tired of taking, tag soup home. And so I was like, okay, I got to do something. And then I think it was like 2004 or 5, I tried out for Top Shot season 3.
Oh, very
and
cool.
yeah, it was a really cool experience. But in doing that, I was like, if you've ever watched Top Shot, they shoot with all weapon systems. So I'm like,
it's
okay,
a great show.
I got to grab my dad's bow, and I got to like start practicing. So that's what I did. I took my dad's bow out. This is a bow that I couldn't draw back as a kid, right? And now as a 21-year-old, I could manage it. When it was tuned all the way down to 45 pounds, I could manage it. And just releasing that first arrow, like reignited a flame that I had forgotten about. Like when I was a kid, I had, one of those standard red compound bows, and I had the banana yellow, not recurve, longbow. And that's what I grew up with, was those. And it was always kind of treated like, if you've got time, go shoot the stump in the backyard. My dad wasn't into really getting into bow hunting. I think he saw it more as like a maybe someday instead of yes right now, because he was good with a rifle.
Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of his thing. I got a couple of pictures of him in the book with one of his blacktails that he got when I was a kid. And he can make it happen. I don't know what his trick is still, but he'll make it happen. So that reignited that whole flame within me. And I was like, okay, now I got to get a bow. So I got married first. So getting a bow kind of took a backseat. Finally, I turned 30 and I was like, it must have been like a midlife crisis for me. So I turned 30 and I'm like, I'm getting a bow, dang it. I'm doing it this year. I put my foot down and I bought a Bear Authority on eBay, like bone stock, nothing, just a string, nothing. So I had to build this bow up and learn all about sights and rests and all that. And it was a really long journey. I started in February. I was going to hunt that season. And so I shot every day, because I wanted to be proficient with my weapon system come hunting season. Absolutely. So I did all that. Then I'm trying to decide where I want to hunt. I haven't had a whole lot of time to scout. So I did some e-scouting. And I went online and looked at Google Maps. So I looked at different GMUs. I ended up down in Elby, Washington. And I won't give like the exact location away, but it's LB, and there's plenty of places down there where you can be successful. We'll just say that. Yeah. So
I'm not super familiar. I didn't archery hunt until I left Washington. So I know muzzleloader and how that works. But is it over the counter? Is it that simple? You can just go get a tag every year, or how does it typically work? Okay.
Yeah. So if you're just trying to put meat in your fridge, you can literally just go and get what I typically get is a combo tag. And that consists of bear, elk, cougar, deer. You have to specify which side of the mountains you want to hunt for elk. So west or east side. And then you have to specify your weapon system, muzzleloader, rifle, or modern, I should say. and then archery. So
Okay.
I've been doing archery the last 9 years now.
Gotcha. So that bear, do you still have that bow? Are you still using that bow?
No.
Or have you
So
upgraded?
I wish I could say, yeah, just, kind of upgrade, but that costs money. So every time I've been upgrading, it's been like trade value plus a little coin.
Yeah.
So I've been trading my way up to what I have now, which is a Hoyt Ventum.
Okay.
And
good bow.
Yeah, it's a good bow. It's only a couple years old, and I like it. It's heavier because I was running a Carbon Spider Turbo, which is a carbon bow, but that weight from a target accuracy standpoint is kind of nice to have. And I don't mind packing it around. If you're used to carrying a 9-pound rifle, packing a 6-pound bow is nothing.
Yeah, I bought a new bow this year, so I was rocking a Parker Poison 32, which is a heavy bow. I didn't know any better though, so I walked around for a few years with it, and I upgraded to a Hoyt RX-7 Ultra, which is just it's a big bow. It is carbon, but it's for a carbon, it's still pretty heavy. But 34 inches axle to axle, so it's just big. But I love it. It shoots awesome, and I couldn't have better things to say about it.
It's a good bow. Side note, when that bow came out, so here in Washington, I don't know if you're familiar with the Turners. Joel Turner, who runs and operates Shot IQ, his son Bodie Turner hangs out at Archery World in Lacey. Okay. And when that bow came in, he and I were both in the shop, and he was in already shooting it right out the box. They had already set it up for him. He was shooting it. And so I was watching him shoot it. And then I shot it after him. And like the biggest takeaway I had from that bow was like how quiet it is.
Yeah.
Like the draw cycle to the shot, it's quiet. And then the feeling of it shooting in my hand, I was like, did that just go off?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was so amazed.
Yeah. I actually, so I shoot lefty. So it was a little weird when I went to go shoot my bows, and we were getting off track here, so we'll get back to your story in a second.
Right.
I went to No Limits in Denver, and I was like, I just want to try every new bow, and so I tried them all, but they didn't have any left-handed bows, so I shot every one of these bows right-handed, which was weird, super weird. And I'm not left-handed; I'm left-eye dominant, but I've never shot a bow anything but left-handed.
Ooh, you're a rarity.
Yeah. So, but man, it was. I would say it and the Matthews, the new Matthews were the ones that I was like, I love both these bows. They're both
the
phenomenal.
V3.
I think the 33X. I think it's 33, maybe 31. But yeah, the V3X. And I just really like the feel of the RX-7 Ultra in my hand. It felt awesome. And
well, I mean, they're both good bows. You can't go wrong either way.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a heavy bow. I mean, for a carbon bow, it's heavy, but that's just because it's it's a big bow. I have a 31.5-inch draw. So
yeah. I mean, you look like a big guy. Not big. I mean, like tall.
Yeah. But yeah, man. Okay, back to your story. So I went off track on bow talk there, but you got your bow, you got it all set up. You were hunting in an area you're not going to share.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's LB, and LB is not huge. So if you're familiar with the Washington area, you can kind of figure out where to go hunt for deer in that area, because there's a lot of deer down there. So I thought and part of the way I was able to figure that spot out was I was looking at harvesting reports. And so I was noticing like the percentages of hunters successfully harvesting in certain GMUs. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go hunt. I try and look for GMUs that are like 30% or better take home, because that means, three or more guys out of 10 are getting an animal. So, okay, cool. I got a chance.
I'll take those odds.
Yeah, I like those odds. So I head down to LB, and I was going to meet up with my buddy, David, who's actually my co-host on the Rugged Arts podcast, and does all my YouTube stuff with me too. I was like, David, let's go down, check this spot out. And he's like, okay. We had some confusion on where we were meeting, and he never showed. And so I ended up meeting the guys that work in the woods, the tree guys. Oh, shoot.
Logger?
Yes, a logger. Thank you. I met a logger who works in that area who was up archery hunting. And he was like, well, my partner couldn't make it either. You want to go hike through the woods? I'm like, sure. This guy knows the area. Yeah, I want to learn something. So he took me down. He's like, oh, we'll go this way. He took me down. We checked it out. And while we were sitting there and BSing about, just kind of getting to know each other, because we didn't really know each other, two does came bounding through, just like on a beeline, right to left. And they didn't even see us. We're sitting next to this tree. And I'm like, oh man, this is dope. So I'm in hunt mode. He's there for elk. And he's like, I'm not here for deer. And I said, well, I'm here for meat. And he's like, they're not even bucks. And I looked at him, I said, I can't eat antlers. So he said, well, if you want to go after him, go ahead. And I was like, okay. By this point, they hadn't stopped. They just kind of kept going. They'd slowed down. They're like 300 yards away by the time I decide, okay, I'm going to go after him. So I take my boots off. And I'm a do-it-yourself kind of guy. So I made some what I call stalker moccasins. And I've got these moccasins on my feet. So I start putting on a stalk on these doe. And I'm slowly going. I'm checking them with my binos to try and read their body language as I'm traversing over these deadfalls and, trying to go under trees and not make any sound. So every time I would take like 3 or 4 steps, I would stop, look at them, see what they were doing, see how chill they were. And then while I'm doing that, I'm mapping where I'm going to walk or step next, take those next couple of steps, and then reassess. I did that for like 20 minutes, it felt like. And I closed the gap to like 60 yards.
All right.
But at that time, I didn't have a rangefinder. I didn't know what 60 yards looked like. It looked like 100 yards. So I was just like, nah, they're too far away. I can't take a shot. Right. So they boogied out because I snapped a branch trying to cut around a little knob hill to close the distance to get to like that 30 range. Right.
Yeah.
I knew as soon as I snapped that branch, they weren't going to be there when I got to the other side. Sure enough, they were gone. So I head back to Sean. And he's like, dude, that was awesome. And I'm like, dude, I didn't even get a shot. And he was like, I've never seen anybody stalk a black-tailed deer like that. He's like, you're like some sort of freaking woods ninja. And I was kind of dumbfounded at that point because for the most part, I had only ever hunted with my dad. And so I'm kind of used to certain things being a norm for me, like being able to do what I did. 3 or 4 steps, read body language, move, assess, keep going, right? Don't rush the stock. But for him, that's not what he was used to seeing. And so that was kind of a learning moment for me. I was like, oh, wow, not everybody knows how to do this. Okay.
Now, is that something that you just naturally knew, or is that something your dad kind of impressed upon
No,
you?
so my dad taught me that. Like when I was a kid, what my dad would do is we would go out in the woods and he would say, step where I step. And we would go, because I would just step wherever as a kid, not knowing. I would break every branch.
Yeah.
Being so loud and obnoxious, like that scene in Avatar,
Yeah.
And so he said, you have to step where I step. And I'm like, okay. And that kind of taught me a lot about how to walk through the woods, about how to figure out where I want to step, first of all, and then what kind of a snap, crackle, or pop I need to pause for and just wait for like 5 minutes because I've just told everyone where I am. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Yeah. That's awesome that you had like a hunting Mr. Miyagi to learn this from. That's awesome.
Yeah. And he was self-taught. His dad never really took him out. He's kind of like you. He started hunting just before he met my mom, really, in his like late teens, early 20s. And he kind of would go out with buddies and whatnot. But for the most part, he was a road hunter, and then he would spot and stalk. He never really sat in a tree stand or anything like that. So I learned how to be a bow hunter with a rifle.
Yeah.
So I don't think I ever saw him take a shot longer than 150, maybe.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So moving forward, Sean was impressed and I was dumbfounded. And I was like, okay, I just learned some major things though, where to be and when to be there. Right. Because I looked at my clock on my wrist and was like, okay, it's 6 a.m. I know they're going to come through this area around 6 a.m. So the following weekend, I call up my dude, David, and I'm like, dude, I'm getting a deer this weekend. Are you coming? And he was like, yeah. I called my other buddy and he was like, nah, I'm busy. I'm like, okay, well, it's going to be me and David. So me and David, we go back out the following weekend and we were late getting there. I wanted to be in at that spot at 5 a.m. So like they would just come bounding in again like they did the first time. No, we got there at 6 and headed in. And I can't really explain. I can't remember why we were late, but we were late. And so we head down the trail, and it was just an old logging road that we were walking down. But on the left side, it kind of banked at like a 30-degree angle. It was pretty steep. And there would be like hallways of clear cuts, if you will, in between these trees. So we're looking down these like little hallways to see if there's any deer. There's fog. It's lifting, but there's a little bit of fog, right? And the sun is like just starting to come up behind us. So I'm like, okay, this is still kind of good. So we get walking down the road, and so you've been hunting like 5 or 6 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this year will be year 7, but the only ones that really count are my 4 of archery. So this year will be year 4 of archery.
Have you started to feel like you've developed like a woods sense? Like you get into an area and you're like, oh man, I'll bet there's deer here right now. Like you just get that overwhelming feeling.
I don't think I'm quite there yet.
Okay.
I've had that feeling, but it's not a regular feeling. So either I'm hunting in terrible areas or I haven't learned that yet. Could be either one.
Yeah. I mean, I've met a couple hunters that like sympathize, but they're generally lifers, like people who grew up and have spent like a lot of time in the woods.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it other than to just like have a feeling that like you're not alone. So we get in there. As soon as I feel like we're not alone, I immediately change my like walk in from just like a gleefully,
stroll
through the woods to more of a slow, very methodical, like rolled heel to the toe walking process, so I can control the sound I'm creating, and I'm panning through the woods more diligently, looking for any kind of movement, right? And so we're literally 600 yards from the truck, and I'm looking to my left, and in the corner of my eye to my right, I see movement on the road I'm on. And I slowly move my head forward, to looking down the path that we're headed. And here is this beautiful, mature doe just walking nonchalantly up the road towards us like a gift from the heavens, because the fog was lifting, right? And here she comes, and she's just kind of, sniffing the ground or whatever. She hadn't caught our wind. I don't think she could see us really well because we were walking along. I don't walk in the middle of the road. I'll walk either side of the road, because generally that's where the ground is softer and you can hide your sound better.
That's good tips. That's a good tip.
Yeah. I hope your listeners are taking notes.
Yeah, right.
So I'm walking the brush line on a road with the sun at my back. So I feel like between what I was wearing and the bush line, I was probably pretty well hidden. And the fact that I like stopped as soon as I saw her, she didn't see my movement. So I did the like stop with my hand to my buddy David, who's trailing like 10 yards behind me. And he can't see what's in front of me, mind you, because there's a bush between us. The road had kind of like bent to the left, and that bush was like perfectly in position where he couldn't see the deer in front of me. He just knew something's up, right? Yeah. And so I got the arrow knocked. I'm putting my release on. I'm like, I don't have a rangefinder, so I have to guess, right? I guess like 30 yards, 35 yards, somewhere in there. And she starts to turn broadside and head to my left, like she's about to jump and go down this hill. But it's all clear in front of me right now. So I'm like, I need to take the shot now, right? So I draw back, I settle in, and I give a little whistle. and she stops dead in her tracks and looks in my direction. And then I just send it. And I hear the thwomp, but my arrow like went in and looked like, to me, from my perspective, that it had gone over her back. I thought I'd hit a stump behind her.
Gotcha.
And she leapt off the road and into the bush. Whoops.
Knocked over a cup on the way.
Yeah. So she leapt off the road and into the bush. And I was like, oh man, I missed my first ever archery doe. No, I immediately knock another arrow. I look back at my dude and I'm giving him the like super bum look. I'm like, I'm sorry, dude, I missed. And he's like hand fist pumping in the air, you know, like, yeah. And I'm like, what? He's like, you totally hit that animal. He's like, I don't know what you hit, but you totally hit it. And I'm like, how do you know that? And he's like, because it's a good sound. I'm like, it sounded like it hit a stump. He's like, yeah, exactly. I was totally doubtful, because that's not what you experience as a rifle hunter. So
yeah, I'm
like, okay, I'll tell you.
So your buddy, remind me his name.
Oh, David.
How long at this point had David been bow hunting?
David had been bow hunting for 4 years at that point, before he hooked up with me.
Gotcha. Okay, so he's got a little bit of experience. All right.
Yeah. He had already heard the thump and knew what it was.
Reliable enough. Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
So I said, okay, here's the deal. We'll go and try and find the arrow that I think is in a stump. And if there's blood on it, then we'll go from there. If there's not, there's not. Right. He's like, okay, because I didn't see where the deer went. So I just knew she went downhill. We go and walk over to where the arrow should be, and there's no stump. Instead, there's a bush. Okay. And this arrow, I'm not joking you, I should have taken a picture at the time, because when I tell people, it just sounds so unbelievable. But the arrow was hanging in the bush, covered in blood, like an ornament on a Christmas tree, just perfectly straight up and down.
Wow.
Like, here you go.
How far back from where the deer was, do you think?
It couldn't have been more than like 5 yards.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was real close. And it was super easy to find, because it was just, like I said, it was just a red glowing like arrow hanging in this bush. It was so crazy to see. I'd never seen anything like that before. So as soon as I saw that and I saw the color of the blood, I knew I had a good hit.
Yeah.
So I was like super jacked. And there's a picture in the book about it. But I was really stoked. So now we got to find her, though, because I didn't watch where she went, because I thought I'd missed. Right. And so now we got to find her. And remember how I was talking about how there was like these hallways of down trees? So I said to David, I'm like, okay, let's give her like 20-30 minutes, and then we'll try and pick up the blood trail and see if we can find her. He's like, okay, good. So we give her some time, and we head down this trail, or not trail, but down the clearing, the side of this hill, and we find the blood trail. We start following it, and then it like disappears. So I'm like, oh no, where did it go? Still haven't found her, but we're only like 15 to 20 yards from where we found the arrow at this point. Right. And I don't see any more blood. Well, because it's a hallway, I said, okay, check this out, David. You go down the right side of this tree line here, down this hill of this hallway of clearing, and I'll go down the left side. And if she went left or right, we should find the blood trail. And then we'll go from there. He's like, okay, good. So we start heading down. It didn't take us very long before we found her in the middle of this clearing, piled up next to a log, a downed log. And she looked just like the log as far as like the color tone.
Yeah. So
that's why we didn't see her right away. But she went from the top of the hill where I shot her, or rode, to where she laid. It was like 90 yards total, but I'm pretty sure she probably slid 30 of that down the hill. So then we had to pack her out, and we didn't really have much to do that. So we hooked her up. Like, what I did was I took a log, not a log, more like a stick, and we cut a hole in her legs
Okay.
and strung her up on the pole, just like you'd see in the old cartoons, you know, and walked her out that way after we gutted her so she wouldn't weigh as much, and walked her back to the truck and went home. And I was done hunting by 7:45.
There you go. And you filled the freezer. Look, you did what you're trying to do.
My first ever deer archery tag. It was so awesome. And from that moment on, I knew I was supposed to be a bow hunter.
That's awesome, man. That's a great story. It's awesome to hear people's moment that they like fall in love with either hunting as a whole or specifically archery hunting or rifle hunting or whatever it may be. Those stories seem to be a common theme when people come on here and want to tell their favorite stories. But let's jump into the next one, man. I don't know if you have anything specifically in mind. I know that you told me that you had one terrible season you maybe wanted to tell me about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Yeah, we can go.
You're like, oh, thanks. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I want to be reminded of this damn.
There's many layers to it, so it'll make for a good little story.
Set the stage.
Okay, so ever since I was a kid, my dad would like take time off work in like the beginning of the season, and we would go on like a 3 or 4 day hunt. Okay. And when I became an adult, I can remember like looking forward to that. But as an adult, you realize the complexity of that, which is finding the time to not be spending it on like projects at home or work or, you know, whatever else you got going on. Getting that time lined up perfectly is difficult. So the one and only time I've had that available was a couple seasons back, and I had 5 days. I worked it out to where I was only using like 2 vacation days at work, and then I went into a 3-day weekend. So I was like, yes, 5 days. I'm getting an animal. This is happening. This is going to be dope. It's going to be a fun adventure because I had asked 2 of my buddies to go with me, David and my other buddy, Solomon. And we had this like little pop-up camper, you know, so it was going to be a fun adventure. Right. We were going to go back out to that LB area, and I didn't realize how popular that area was for like 4-buying and off-roading. So we get there, and immediately I'm at a conflict with some guys who like camp there every Labor Day weekend for like the last 15 years, and they go wheeling, and they usually do it at night. Like they wheel all night. Now, and maybe you do this, I don't know, but this is the first time I'd ever heard of this. But they had like those 54-inch light bars across the top of the truck. You know, they look like disco balls rolling through the woods. And they got their music.
Remind me, I've got 2 stories that are, you've already pinged 2 stories here for myself. So I'll tell them when you're done here, but go ahead.
All right. They've got their music just like cranked in their rigs. And I'm just like, you know, this is a good example of where rifle hunters and archery hunters and muzzleloaders, for that matter, need to like meet in some sort of a meeting and go, hey, okay, during my dates, please don't be out in the woods shooting to sight in your rifle or wheeling or any of that stuff, scaring off all the animals for me. I really appreciate it if you didn't do that. But anyways, so there was that. So I had to move my spot, which is whatever. I mean, a good hunter can make do with a bad situation. So I said, okay, I'll move down the road a ways, but I was gonna still hunt in that area, even though they would be wheeling all night. So my buddies show up, and the one buddy says, I invited a 4th party. And that, you know, like maybe you don't know, but when someone invites, whether it be directly or indirectly, a 4th party that nobody else in the group has met before, that can go one of 2 ways, good or bad.
Yeah.
So this
I'm
didn't
shaking
go
my
well.
head because I'm with you, man. I don't invite anyone to a hunting party unless my hunting party. We'll basically take a vote on someone else joining. It's sacred, you know. Like I've had again. I have 3 stories I got to tell about exactly that. So, but continue.
You better be taking notes over there, right?
Oh my goodness!
So you don't forget, because you're gonna forget.
I might. Okay, fine. I'll take notes. Go ahead, though.
Yeah, you should be taking notes while you do that. Anyways, so I'm not going to mention names because the guy's a really cool guy. You know, he's got a good heart and everything. He just didn't work well in that situation. And so he shows up, and we're kind of feeling him out. You know how it goes. And we quickly learn that the only hunting he's ever done is from a tree stand with his grandpa. And it's usually like rifle hunting, which means he's freezing his tail off in October in a tree stand, you know, waiting 8 hours for maybe something to show up. So ground and pound, if you will, is way different for him. He was not dressed for it. He had on like winter attire, a onesie camouflage suit, like he was the little kid from the Christmas Story, you know. He just looked like a State Puff camo man. And so we're like, day one, we're out there walking around and he is burning up. He's sweating so hard. I felt sorry for the guy, but he didn't have any other camos. So it's like, what are you going to do?
Yep.
So he had to tough it out. And then at one point we're like, okay, you're just going to take it off and, you know, roll with what you got. No big deal. And just shove it in your backpack. So he takes his backpack off, and then like, he didn't even know how to pack. He had like, you know, those, the mosquito, citronella thingies or propane deals that you carry on your hip.
Yeah. Yep.
He had like 40 refills for that thing when he maybe needed one, and it was just like taking up his whole bag.
That's
and then
awesome.
He had like a bunch of other stuff that he wasn't going to need at all. And I felt so bad because he's carrying all this weight that he doesn't need. And it just, you know, that was another example of like somebody not knowing who I felt like maybe should have known.
Well, you never know. I had a buddy that I invited hunting for the first time. He's actually still my hunting buddy, but the first year he showed up, he was like, what do I need? He drove in from Texas, and I'm like, I got you. Just bring some food for yourself. He brought a 40 pack of candy bars. That is it. And I was like, all right,
my own heart. Like,
I was like, delicious, man, but you are going to crash. I was like, this is not acceptable. I was like, I got enough that I'll share, but we got to talk about this.
This guy didn't bring anything. He didn't bring any food. He was only supposed to be there for one day. He stayed for all 5. And I was just like, one day bled into another. And I was like, dude, you need to tell I'm the guy that invited him. I'm like, bro, you need to talk to this guy and find out what's the deal. Like, how many more days do we got to deal with this? Because none of us wanted to be the guy to say, you know what, it's not working out. We're gonna have to ask you to leave. We just didn't want to be that way. And so we let him tag along. I really hope he learned something. But like, another example of how it went was like, we were walking into this area, and you know, it's a little foggy. We see a rabbit, a cottontail, and all of a sudden he's a cottontail hunter. It's like, dude, like, you're gonna blow the whole hunt for you today, you know, right here, right now on a rabbit. I really want to get that rabbit. I'm like, okay, whatever, dude. So
I can't judge him there. I've done that. It was a snowshoe hares, but there was a blizzard, so it's like we couldn't see more than 10 feet. So we were like, all right, let's try and kick up some rabbits.
Sure. I mean, we've all probably been there, but with 3 other guys in your hunting party, I don't know. Anyways, I felt like it was the wrong place, the wrong time. But nevertheless, I said, okay, come here. So he's standing next to me, and I'm trying to point out where the rabbit is because I can see the way his body is lined up, the way his arrow is pointing, and he is not aiming anywhere near this rabbit. And I can see it. It's only like 20 yards away. Why are you aiming way over here? I'm like, as I'm reaching out over his shoulder to like try and point at where the rabbit is, he sends it and totally douches an arrow, and you're not going to find it. It's toast. You know, it hit the dirt. So your broadhead's garbage and your shaft is done. Right. And with his setup, that's $20 gone on a rabbit. So I'm like, dude, what were you aiming at? And he's like, oh, I was aiming at that right there. I'm like, that is a bush. You didn't even know what you're aiming at? Like, come on, you have to be able to identify your target. Like,
God, that's
if
scary.
you don't know what you're aiming at,
Yeah.
you shouldn't take that shot.
Absolutely.
So there was a lot of other things that I could really just sit here and rant all day about it. But the whole moral of that little endeavor was that, I would love it if everybody could come with me on a hunt, but it's just not everybody's going to blend, and that will spoil a hunt for sure.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take this pause to tell you one of my 3 stories, which is about a bad person being invited. So I always believed you had to be invited to hunting camp. I wasn't invited. They told me I can't come until I was married to my wife because it was a family hunting camp. Either way, get married, go on this camp. One year, my brother-in-law just is like, a buddy of mine that I've known my entire life is coming. I'm like, all right, well, my brother-in-law's a good guy. He's got a pretty good judge of character. Sure. Like it's happening, why get upset about it? So this guy rolls in. I can't even remember his name, but he is obviously not there to hunt. He's there to drink with his buddies. And it kind of rolls the whole camp that direction. So I'm there to hunt. And all of a sudden they're there just drinking. They're drinking until 3 a.m. And we were waking up at 6, and good on them if they're able to get on their feet and go. But it was just awful. There were multiple days where they just jumped in the car and went 4-wheeling and just drinking beers. And then this guy was just he's an idiot too. We had an extra cot, and he opened the cot up, and there's a pad that goes on top of it, and it was folded into the bottom. He didn't even use that. So he just laid on a cot with no pad. And then of course this guy, the thing that just like puts the whole thing together is when he left, he took every beer in camp and drove 4 hours home. So he probably he literally took probably like 35-40 beers and just took off, just left us in camp with no beers left over. So I was like, yeah, no.
Oh no, that's a nail in the coffin.
Yeah, from this point forward, there is you are not invited to hunting camp unless you got to be unanimous. It can't be a majority. It's got to be unanimous. So it's a big deal, especially you had 5 days, right? Man, there's a big deal to have those 5 days, and frankly, he put a cloud over your whole hunt. Like having a bad person in camp can ruin everything.
Yeah, exactly. So I have not had 5 days in the woods like that since. But if I do, my hunting party is going to be very small.
Yeah.
So that was just one part of that season, right? So then me, David, and Solomon decide we're going to go hunt a different area later in that season. And David almost got ran over by a bull elk. Like we were hunting for deer, scouting for elk in the late season, right? And we went into this area, and it was like literally 3 days or so before elk season. And he decided to take here's a tip for all you hunters out there. If you're hunting with a group and you are in last place in your little line of guys, okay, you're bringing up the tail end, so to speak. Do not deviate from the group and go off on some trail willy-nilly, okay, without having told somebody. Because me and Solomon spent an hour and a half or 2 hours scouring the woods trying to figure out where he went. And he was off on his own adventure, found a cool little deer trail that he showed us later, and it was super cool, and told us this amazing story about how he'd gone off on this trail, saw some good sign, and while he was in there, he heard like thunder and the earth was shaking, and he looked over he thought a deer was coming in, so he drew back and he looked up, and here's this 5x5 about ready to just run him over. And he was like, holy moly. And then he had that thought that all of us hunters have, which is, if I was a lesser man, I might take this shot, not say anything, and just throw it in the car and roll out.
Yeah.
But thankfully he didn't,
Yeah.
But that was pretty cool experience. However, it kind of like messed up that area for us, and just that whole season, it was just a tag soup season. And
I had that soup before.
Yeah. It sucks.
It does.
Yeah.
I know you earlier, I'll tell you another story because we got a little moment here. You've talked about guys that camp in the same spot for 15 years. This isn't actually my story. This is a story of my brother-in-law and his buddy, who maybe I'll get one of them on the podcast here in the future and probably tell this exact story. But they found a spot by random. They accidentally put in for different tags. The tags ended up being next door units. So they're like, okay, we'll just set up camp in between and you'll camp that side or you'll hunt that side, I'll hunt this side. So it seemed logical for them. Either way, they find a spot, set up camp. They ended up camping there for years. But I believe it was their first or second year there that there was this truck that just was there and it just was always around. And so they were out hunting one day, again, muzzleloader season. So it's early October. And all of a sudden they just hear gunfire, just bullets going off like crazy, like a war. Like they don't know what's going on. And it's midday. It's like, I don't know, noon to 2, somewhere right there in the middle. And they're like, what is going on? Like, who is firing that many rounds? And it just doesn't make any sense. Just they said they probably heard, I mean, they know the exact number now, but if you were hear the story, they're like over 100 rounds, just fired off, just like nonstop. So they finish the day, they go back to camp. And they have one of those Davis, Davis wall tents that's fire treated and just a quality tent, mold treated because it's Washington, right? You got to. And so they get back to camp. In their camp, there's a fire truck and their tent has burned to the ground. Literally everything is burned to the ground. And so they're like, what the hell happened to the firemen? Are like, did you guys leave your stove going? Like, what happened here? And they're like, no, we were back, probably around 10 in the morning and the fire was cold out, completely cold. So the hypothesis is that they camped in someone's spot 2 years in a row. And that person's like, nope, I'm not having this, and burned down their tent. And the gunfire that they heard was all the ammunition that they had. So all the black powder. They also had a bunch of pistol rounds because they carry when they're in there. And their tent burned, like those tents, they're fire treated. They're not meant to burn. So the fire started inside and it was like an oven. Everything inside melted. Like there was nothing left over, except the corner of the tent that the furnace or the stove was actually in, because you don't put anything near the stove. So there's nothing there for really to burn. So the only place that was left was right next to the stove. So it was pretty obvious.
I would tell you right there, if you're a fireman, they didn't leave the stove on.
Right. Yeah. So basically we don't know, but we're pretty sure there was an arsonist that came in and just burned down their entire hunting camp. So we hunted there a few more years, and every year we'd find little flecks of burnt tent just right in that same spot. It was just crazy, man. What people will do for their hunting spot or their camping spot. Who knows if they were hunters? But but we definitely set up cameras on camp from that point forward to make sure that if anyone did come by, we at least snap a couple pictures of them.
Yeah, like if you've got the file, and I will have a hard copy of my book in my hands next weekend, and so you just email me your address and I'll send you an autographed copy, not a problem. Then you'll have a paperback, to kind of show around and read and make notes or whatever. But in the chapter about changing the world of hunting, that's kind of like one of those little things that I want to change, not just so much like the way hunters and the industry talk about hunting. Say, for instance, the word kill. I try to replace it with harvest as much as I can, just because for someone that's not, that didn't grow up in a hunting environment, the word kill sounds premeditated and malicious, whereas the word harvest has more of a stewardship undertone to it. So there's more meaning and respect going into what you're doing. And so in that chapter, like if I could, I don't know if I really touched on it very well, but people getting ownership over an area, like a hunting spot, to the point where they feel they have to burn somebody's tent down or take some of their equipment or whatever. Like, come on. As a group, we should be bigger than that, I agree. And if we want other people to view the industry the way, I feel most hunters do, then we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
I agree 100%. And to lighten the mood and say that we're not all bad, right? I have
No.
never met a hunter in the woods that I have not invited back to camp to have a beer later. So I've had plenty of beers with random guys that are telling me their stories, because obviously I have an affinity for hunting stories. So I'm like, hey man, come back to camp. Like when the sun's down, when we're done hunting here, let's connect. So, and I've never had anyone say no either. So there's good people out there, but of course, anything, no matter what you do, there's going to be bad apples.
Sure.
That's how it is. So
yeah.
Cool, man. Well, Dustin, your bad season. Do you have any more to it, or is that it? Are we done rubbing salt in the wounds?
Yeah, I don't want to rub any more salt in that wound. I kind of like to just leave it at that. It's done, it's over with. It was a nice learning lesson, but what your listeners should be able to take away from the two stories that I have told is that in both stories, there's an element where I'm learning something, not only about what I'm doing, but also about who I'm spending that moment with, right? And I'm realizing that not everybody in the hunting community shares the same knowledge. You know what I'm saying? So one guy might know how to stalk in the woods better than the next guy, and we need to be able to comfortably share that with each other. And so you'll see in the book kind of like a transition where I go from learner to experiencing to teaching, and I'm trying to like pass it on. And so that was kind of like how this book sort of came to be, and what I hope people take away from it. It's like to learn, to experience, and to pass it on.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, why don't we tell the people where they can find you? I think this is a good point to kind of wrap it up, and I think we'll have you back on to tell you some more stories later. But for now, I know you have a podcast. Tell the people that your Instagram, maybe the title of your book and where they can find it. I know at the time of this recording, the book is not available, but the time that I'm going to post this, it will be. So I'll put a link to all of these things in the show notes. But why don't you share where the people can find you?
Okay, so places you can find me is really simple. Just remember The Rugged Arts with 2 G's. So The Rugged 2 G's Arts at yahoo.com. That's my email address. So if you buy a book and you want it autographed, you can hit me up on the email, and we'll see what we can do about, sending you an autographed book, or you can ship me the one you bought and then I'll autograph it and send it back. The book is called Student of the Woods. Funny story. Originally, it started out as Campfire Stories, Campfire Logs.
Okay.
And then Steven Ranella came out with Campfire Stories.
Yeah.
So it forced me to change the title.
Yeah.
And kind of like rebrand the book, if you will. I had to kind of move some chapters around or whatever, but I think it worked out for the best.
Yeah.
You can find me on
your next book could be the hunting ninja, right? Like the log.
Yeah, right. Yeah, giving all the secrets away about being quiet in the woods. So you can find us on Spotify, The Rugged Arts, and the same goes for YouTube, The Rugged Arts. So it's all the same. And awesome. If and when we have a website, it'll be the same thing. And that way it's all super easy to remember and to pass on.
Perfect. Yeah. And like I said, I will make sure that there are links to everything in the show notes. So if you're looking for it and you're not good at remembering or didn't write it down, like I wrote down my stories when you reminded me to, then just look below and click on that. So Dustin, this was fun, man.
I didn't tell you. I'm sorry. Amazon is where you would want to go to find the book. Okay. Student of the Woods. There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect, man. Perfect. All right. Well, this was fun. Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some stories with us. I'm super excited to actually have enough time to sit down and read the book, since I know I do have a copy. It'd probably be after hunting season, I'm gonna be honest, because right here.
Yeah, I get it.
It's August 20th, so September 2nd, I'm disappearing for, I think I actually have 9 days this year to hunt. So hopefully I don't do tag soup. We'll see. Yeah, well, hey man, good luck. Hunt hard, hunt smart, and be safe. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I'm just gonna cross my fingers and hope I'm half as quiet as you. So thanks again, Dustin. I appreciate it. Yeah, anytime, man. All right, guys.
And that's it. Another bunch of stories in the books. Speaking of books, Dustin's book is titled Student of the Woods. I believe at the time that this is released, it will be available. Please check the show notes for links to all of Dustin and the Rugged Arts. They have a YouTube channel. They have a podcast. Of course, his book. There'll be an Amazon link. I highly encourage you guys to check it out. I'll be honest, I have not read it yet, but that's because it hasn't been released. He sent me a copy, but here we are right at the beginning of antelope season, about to dive into the elk woods. So it's going to be on the shelf for me until probably October, but I'll make sure to give a review at that point. So I want to thank Dustin again for jumping on the podcast. It was really fun talking to him. He was as excited as I am to tell a couple stories. So again, Dustin, thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed hearing from him as well. That being said, we're always looking for more storytellers. So if you hear this, reach out to me. Let me know. I'd love to hear your crazy story, your dad's crazy stories, your mom's crazy stories, whoever it may be. I would love to get you on the podcast. Beyond that, please subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Instagram, and share it with everyone that you possibly can. We're trying to grow this thing and see where it takes us. So that's it, folks. Thanks again. I appreciate you all tuning in. I appreciate Dustin telling us some stories. Now, go make some stories of your own. Thank you.